Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to True Healing and Recovery. I'm your boy, Coach Mikey Rowe. Welcome back to the show where chains break, minds wake, and purpose takes its rightful place. Today, we're stepping into another controversial conversation, probably the most controversial conversation in addiction recovery, period. Period. A conversation that divides doctors, scientists, counselors, pastors, recovery groups, man, families, ultimately people in recovery themselves. You ready? Is addiction really a disease? Or is it choice? Or is it trauma? Is it a mental health disorder? Is it ultimately a spiritual problem? If you've spent any amount of time on social media, you've probably seen people arguing about this. One person says addiction is a disease just like diabetes. Another says, nope, nope, that's just an excuse. Someone else brings up trauma. Addiction is simply trauma. Then another person says, man, addiction is a sin. And before long, everybody is trying to prove they're right. Meanwhile, someone sitting alone, listening to all of this, isn't wondering who's right. They're wondering, can somebody just help me? That's why I want to speak on this today in this episode. Not to attack anyone, not to defend one side, one camp. I'm not to create another debate. I want us to think. I want us to learn. And hopefully, by the end of this episode, we'll spend less time arguing over labels and more time helping people heal. Driving to work, working out, sitting in treatment. There's somebody listening right now, this very moment. Someone in long term recovery. Listen, or maybe you're a family member just trying to understand someone that you love. I want to welcome you all and let's have a conversation. So, before we ask if addiction is a disease, let's ask a different question. You ready? What is a disease? What is a disease, guys? That sounds real simple, but most people have never actually truly thought about it. I mean, we hear words like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, Parkinson, Alzheimer, COVID, right? And we assume that every disease behaves the same way. They don't, right? Modern medicine actually recognizes different categories of diseases. And understanding those categories completely change this conversation. So, category one, I try to simplify everything as I learn and speak on things. Category one, curable diseases. Some diseases can actually be eliminated, right? Take bacterial pneumonia. You receive the proper antibiotics, the infection clears. You're healthy again, right? Or hepatitis C. Years ago, people often lived with it for life. Today, modern antiviral medications cure many cases completely, even some cancers. After successful treatment, doctors eventually say, there's no evidence of disease. The disease is gone. That's what medicine calls a cure. All right. Category two, chronic diseases. Now let's talk about this. This is another category, guys. Diseases like type 1 diabetes, high blood pressure, what is it? Rheumatoid arthritis. These diseases usually aren't eliminated. They're managed. Treatment doesn't remove the disease. Treatment changes how the person lives with it. Many people live long, healthy, meaningful lives even while managing these conditions. Category 3, self-limiting diseases. These you know these diseases your own body overcomes. Maybe you've had the flu, a stomach virus, common cold. Sometimes with enough rest, time, staying hydrated, your immune system eliminates the illness. And medicine calls this self limiting diseases. So, what does healing actually mean? And here's something fascinating. Medicine, modern medicine, they don't throw around the word healing or healed very often, right? Instead, it's used very it's specific language, right? So a cure, the word cure means the disease is gone and it isn't expected to return, right? Then you have remission. Remission means the symptoms disappear, but the disease could still return, right? Recovery means a person regains normal functions after the illness, right? And then there's disease modification. And that's where treatment changes the course of the disease without completely eliminating it. Now, why does this matter? Yo, coach, why does this matter? Because many arguments about addiction aren't actually arguments about addiction. They're arguments about definition. Two people can look at the exact same individual, 10 years sober, healthy, working, raising a family, living a meaningful life, and one person calls that long-term recovery, while another calls it healing, and another calls it remission. Sometimes we're arguing over words instead of celebrating lives that have been transformed. So, where does addiction fit? Now, here's where this conversation it gets interesting. Many medical organizations classify addiction as a chronic brain disease. Why? Because repeated substance use changes the brain. The brain has something called the reward system, right? Normally, that reward system motivates us towards healthy things, food, relationships, purpose, achievements. But addictive substances, what do? They flood the brain with dopamine. And dopamine is often called what? Is called what? The brain's reward chemical, that feel good chemical. Eventually, the brain begins learning, hey, that substance, that substance is survival. And then over time, decision making becomes weaker. Impulse control declines. And the brain literally changes. And that's why someone can continue using even after losing their family, even after losing their career, their freedom, their health, not because they don't care, but because their brain has been altered. See, that's the disease model. And there's significant scientific evidence that supports that. But here's the question: if addiction is a disease, can it be healed? And this is where people often stop talking because the answer isn't as simple as yes or no. So let's talk about what science says about recovery. Here's something hopeful. The brain has an incredible ability called neuroplasticity. That's a big word. That's a big word with a simple meaning. The brain can change. The brain can adapt. The brain can reorganize. The brain can recover. Hey, the research has shown that after prolonged abstinence, dopamine signaling often improves, right? The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for judgment, responsible for planning, can become more functional. Memory often improves. Thinking becomes clearer. Emotional regulation improves. Stress systems begin to normalize. That's incredible. That's incredible. Your brain isn't frozen forever. Healing happens. Real healing, measurable healing. See, that's one reason some researchers believe addiction can uh, involve genuine recovery, not just symptom management. But here's the other side. Here's the other side. Research also shows that for some people, sensitivity to drug related cues and relapse risk can remain elevated for years. A smell, a place, a group of friends, stressful life event can reactivate powerful cravings. That's why many providers, medical providers, prefer the phrase long term recovery rather than cure. Not because they don't believe healing happens, excuse me, but because vulnerability can remain. And honestly, both observations can be true. The brain can heal dramatically, while some vulnerabilities may still exist. Man, I hope you're enjoying this conversation. Now, trauma challenges the conversation. So let's talk, or let me ask another question. What happened before the addiction? Because, listen, very few children dreamed about becoming uh, an addict, becoming an alcoholic, becoming a. I know I didn't. ACEs, guys, research on advanced childhood experience, the ACEs, it shows that childhood trauma significantly increases the risk of substance use later in life, right? Abuse, neglect, violence, bullying, sexual assault, growing up around addiction, losing a parent, being abandoned. Many people weren't trying to get high. They were trying to stop the hurt. The alcohol wasn't the goal, the numbness was. The heroin wasn't the dream, the escape was. I often tell folks You were not addicted to the substance. You became addicted to the relief that the substance brought. See, trauma doesn't excuse addiction, but it often explains where it began. And if we never address the wound, simply removing the substance may not heal the person. Well, let's talk about another truth. Personality matters, right? What about personal responsibility? I truly believe that personal responsibility matters, guys. The first drink, the first pill, the first hit, the first bet, the first click. Those first decisions usually involve choice. Recovery also involves choice. Choosing treatment, choosing honesty, choosing accountability, choosing to ask for help, choosing to keep going after relapse, choosing to continue listening and being a part of this conversation. You see, the disease model should never eliminate responsibility, and the choice model should never eliminate compassion. Those two things can exist together. Accountability without compassion becomes condemnation, and compassion without accountability becomes enabling. Recovery requires both. And my favorite part, guys, you know what my faith is. What does the Bible say? What does the Bible say? See, the Bible never uses the word addiction, but it often speaks about bondage, right? Jesus said, everyone who sins is a slave to sin, right? The Apostle Paul writes something remarkable in Romans chapter 7. He says, the good I want to do, I don't. The evil that I don't want to do, that I keep doing. How many people in addiction have felt exactly that? Man, I don't want this no more. I don't want this. I don't want to do this no more. But I keep doing it. See, the Bible acknowledges the struggle, but it also offers hope. Romans chapter 12 tells us to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Second Corinthians says anyone in Christ is a new creation. See, the gospel isn't simply behavior modification, it's transformation, guys. See, maybe everyone is seeing one piece. See, imagine four experts standing around one person struggling with addiction. The neuroscientist says, I see brain changes. A trauma therapist says, I see childhood wounds. A behavioral psychologist is going to say something, I see learned behaviors and habits. A pastor is going to say, I see someone longing for freedom and restoration. Who's wrong? Who's wrong? Maybe none of them. Maybe they're describing different layers of the same human experience. I love this, guys. Listen, before we end, I want to talk directly to you listening right now. Maybe you're 2 days sober. Maybe you're 20 years sober. Maybe you're listening from a rehab. Maybe you're sitting in prison. Maybe you're sitting in your car wondering if life will ever get better. I want you to hear me. Listen, science says your brain has an incredible capacity to recover. Medicine recognizes that profound, lasting recovery is possible, even while experts continue debating whether to call it a cure, remission, or long term recovery. Families can heal, relationships can heal, trust can be rebuilt, purpose can return. And as a Christian, I believe something even greater. I believe the one true living God is in the business of restoring what the world has written off. Not overnight, not without work, not without honesty, not without accountability, but with hope through Christ Jesus. Whether you call it healing, recovery, remission, freedom, transformation, or simply a second chance, lives can change every single day. So maybe the better question isn't, is addiction a disease? Maybe the better question is, how do we help people heal? Do they need detox? Do they need medication? Do they need trauma therapy? Do they need counseling? Do they need accountability? Do they need community? Do they need faith? Sometimes the answer isn't one of those. Sometimes the answer is all of them. Let's stop making people choose between science and compassion, between accountability and grace, between medicine and hope, because addiction has already taken enough from too many people. It doesn't need to divide the people trying to fight it. And guys, if you're struggling today, right now, hang in there. Don't quit. If you relapse, stand back up. If you're discouraged, reach out. If you're walking beside someone who is struggling, don't give up on them. Healing isn't always fast. Recovery isn't always straight, but progress is possible. And none of us were meant to walk this road alone. So, guys, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for spending this time, giving me your precious time. And if this conversation challenged you, encouraged you, or made you think, please share it with someone who needs it. And I love to hear your perspective in the comments. Let's keep the conversation respectful, curious, and centered on helping people, not winning arguments. Until next time, guys, this is True Healing and Recovery, where chains break, minds wake, and purpose takes its rightful place. I'm your boy, Coach Mike Rowe. And remember, sobriety may open the door, but healing is the journey. And as always, don't ever forget, another day is another blessing. Peace.